Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled Planet X and the Bible, the Artificial Sun Simulation System. Now, there is plenty of evidence that the sun we see in the sky is not the real sun, but an artificial device which simulates the real sun. And there seem to be several models in operation, and I show some of these that I have written about below. Some seem to be operating within the Earth's atmosphere, some seem to be in orbit. This particular one that is shown here in this photograph, and we can see that it has to be an artificial device because there is cloud in front of it and there is cloud behind it. And the only way this is possible is if this is a sun simulator and it's operating at cloud altitude. And I have talked about this before in article 117. I talked about this photograph, which I show here again, where we can see what seems to be the sun, a light source below a line of dark clouds. We then see a gap in the clouds. We then see what seems to be the sun shining through some high altitude clouds. But because there's a gap there and we do not see the sun shining through the gap, the only possible explanation is that this is a reflection. And if this is a reflection, there has to be a light source below these high altitude clouds. And this means, since high altitude clouds are usually at an altitude no greater than 45,000 feet, this means that this light source, this artificial sun, has to be below 45,000 feet. Now here we see, this is the ISS sun simulator. As you can see, it doesn't look like the sun at all. It has rays in every direction. There seems to be a hexagonal shaped kind of device behind it, and this round shape. And with Scott's help, I came up with a design for it, which would reproduce what we see in these images. It will look somewhat like that. It would use some laser beams, laser generation device. I show one of these here. And the other design I have worked on was based on this patent from 1966. It would have mirrors here. These are concave mirrors, and a light source behind it with a hole in it and a reflector there. And this may be somewhat the design that this simulator that was photographed in the sky is made out of. We do see what looks like a hexagonal mirror made up of an array of hexagonal mirrors. And it's possible that this mirror that we see in front here can be made up of such an array. It does have the gap that we expect, as this one has that gap. So it's possibly that this one has a design similar to that. And so there are several designs, and there would be several of these. Each section on the surface of the Earth would be assigned one of these systems. If it's in orbit, it would orbit, and each part of the system would in turn shine on a different portion of the Earth. So we would need a whole fleet, a whole system of these in order for the sun to be simulated for every portion of the Earth's surface. Now, the reason why we need a sun simulation device is because the solar system has been invaded by these objects, which are called stellar cores, which are all burnt out stars that come into the sun's corona. We see this one, it's actually striped. and they absorb energy from the sun. They absorb plasma from the sun. We can see the plasma connection that this device is making with the sun, and this plasma connection is made through a magnetic connection. They interact magnetically with the sun, not gravitationally. And they have demonstrated that the sun is electric in nature, that the universe is electrical in nature, that the gravitational view of the universe and the sun is wrong, that everything seems to be electrical in nature. And an electrical sun then can go dark, and it seems to actually go dark as demonstrated by the so-called SDO eclipse season, which is not actually an eclipse at all. That is just a story used to cover up the fact that the sun is going dark. And these objects seem to have started arriving at least 100 years ago, and since then they have been affecting the sun and weakening it. So it's been for quite a while that we've had problems occurring with the sun. And the reason why I think it's 100 years is because one of the first manifestations of these objects having come into the solar system and rejuvenating by rejuvenating I mean they regain the ability to emit light once again. When they come in, they only emit infrared light. They are all burnt out stars, so they are not emitting visible light. But after being in the sun's corona for a while, they absorb energy from the sun and they start being able to emit light once again. But so in 1917 seems to have been one of the first manifestations that these objects were invading the sun. And so they have been here, I think, for quite a while. And I have written several articles about these objects, and one of them is this article 116, where I talk about the different sizes of these objects. They range in size from 4 times the size of the Earth to 3 times the size of the sun. And possibly there are many more than those that have been observed. There seems to be an effort being made to hide these objects from the Earth's population. So it is not always easy to get clear data on actually what's going on. But we do know, and I've written about this for a while, that the SDO eclipse season is actually a time when the sun actually goes dark. It's not actually an eclipse, that's a cover-up story. But we see, and the evidence that the sun is going dark can be obtained by just looking at the corona. And the corona shrinks back as the sun grows darker and darker. If this was an actual eclipse, then we would expect for this part of the sun to be covered when the Earth reaches this point, and then we would expect the corona to be covered as well. But what actually happens in every single image, as the darkness progresses across the face of the sun, the corona shrinks back, as we see it has shrunk back here. If it hadn't shrunk back, we'd expect to see corona there and corona there. It would look the same as it does here. It would just be covered up to this point. This does not happen. And I have explained this in several articles. For example, this one, How Do Stars Produce Light? That's article 110. I wrote about this. And article 71, Can Planet X Cause the Sun to Go Dark? And so this happens for up to 69 minutes per day for about 20 days in succession. And I believe this is happening at other times as well. The sun is most likely growing dark, or sometimes going completely dark. And the fact may actually be actively hidden from us by light being added to certain images. But there is enough evidence to show that the sun is weakening and weakening more and more. This is an image from December 30th, 2017. It's a gauss image, so it's an X-ray image. But we can see that the coronal holes covering the face of the sun have grown in size to such an extent that it seems like almost 100% of the face of the sun facing the earth is covered in coronal holes now. And since we are still 1.5 years away from the solar minimum, this is not supposed to be happening, but it is. And I've written about the fact that the sun seems to be weakening and weakening very fast, and this weakening is accelerating, possibly because more and more coronal holes seem to be arriving and they continue to drain the sun, and it is basically dying. And this weakening can also be seen in these images. These are SDO image in the 304 angstrom, and we can see how the sun has darkened over the years. This is from 2012, 2013, 2014, and the last solar maximum was in 2014, and we can see that the sun became darker between 2013 and 2014, and thus showing that it's weakening independently of the solar cycle. And this was the subject of this article I recently wrote, article 118, solar activity declining independent of the solar cycle. Is the sun dying? So the sun is weakening, and this is why we would need a sun simulation system made up of many elements. Just many elements would be needed to simulate the sun. Each section on the surface of the earth would need its own simulator, and then we would need devices that would simulate the moon and the planets, because if the sun is not shining, then the moon and the planets would not appear in the sky either, since they reflect sunlight. So a whole large system would be necessary to simulate everything so that everything looks normal to the inhabitants of the earth. And the most surprising thing is that such a system seems to actually be mentioned in the Bible, because in Revelation 8 verse 12 it is written, "Then the fourth angel sounded, and the third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night." Now, notice that if the scripture was, for example, referring to a third of the actual moon, because it says a third of the moon was struck, and if the third of the real moon was destroyed, then we would still expect to see the moon in the sky. It just would have a strange shape because a third of it would be missing. But if the sun was still working normally, then the moon would still be reflecting sunlight, and everybody on earth would in turn, whenever it was their time and nighttime, would see the moon. So what could possibly cause the fact that the moon, or a third of the moon, is destroyed, cause a third of the night not to shine, or a third of during a third of the night it not being seen? And the only logical explanation for that is that this is actually an artificial system designed to project the moon. And if a third of the system is destroyed, then all the inhabitants on the earth, when it was their turn to see the moon in that 1/3, or it was projected for them by that 1/3 of the system, and if that part of the system was damaged, would not see it. So it would seem like 1/3 of the night would not shine, because possibly it includes not just the moon but the stars. So a third of the night would not shine, and if a third of that part of the system included the sun, then a third of the sun, and in this case which would work during the day, would not shine either. So this seems to be talking about an actual system that simulates, an artificial system that simulates the sun, the moon, and the stars. And the stars, I would expect, would include the planets. Most people who do not have specialized knowledge, when they look at the sky and they see a planet, they think of it as a bright star. So we would expect that this system simulates the brightest of whatever objects we are supposed to observe in the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars, including the planets. And if a third then is damaged, then a third of the system would not be viewed by the Earth's inhabitants, and it would then lead to a third of the day not shining, and likewise a third of the night. So, in conclusion, with the sun having weakened as it has in the past few years, as well as the fact that it is periodically going completely dark and most likely going dark more and more, it is not surprising that an artificial sun simulation system which simulates the sun, moon, and planets has become a necessity to keep the truth regarding the weakening sun and the presence of the stellar cores which are causing these changes in the sun from the Earth's population. This artificial system seems to be mentioned in the Bible in Revelation 8 verse 12, where we are told that it will become damaged so that a third of the day and a third of the night will not shine. The fact that we can now understand that this scripture is talking about this kind of system is an indication that the time when this event occurs may be fast approaching. And here are the references. If you're interested in the different things I talk about in this article, I've written about all of these before in these different articles. And this is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.